to the now, hell to the now.
Welcome to the 615 Sessions podcast here on this Friday, October the 18th. We're happy to have you in for another episode of the podcast. We got Johnny G. He is the toughest get, apparently, in all of Titans media. The man has been MIA from the podcast, but that's all right. We're happy to have him back. The podcast, of course, is presented by Zen Sports. Promo code ATOZTN gets you in on all the action on all your favorite major sports. Happy Friday, Johnny.
Thank you, Buck. Thanks for having me.
Of course, you're always welcome. I am currently, I don't know what to do with the football team, Johnny. I feel like I've just been talking myself into circles for 3 hours a day on radio and the YouTube show and a podcast, and maybe I'm just talking too much. I don't know. But a couple of notable items to come out of practice today. I wasn't able to make it because practice was going on while I was on the air. Brian Callahan gave a number of injury updates, but no update on the fact that the quarterback is going to be questionable on Sunday. How about that shit?
Yeah, that was a little bit of a shocker. Because he did, mention obviously a few people were going to be out, Coburn, Spears, and Traylon Burks. He said, Snead probably be questionable, and I think he kind of referenced it. There might be a couple questionables, that kind of thing. I don't think any of us expected the other questionable to be Will Levis, the quarterback. But on the injury report, it was noted that Will Levis was not full practice today. He was limited as opposed to Thursday, and is officially up in the air, for Sunday. More often than not, we see the questionables play, but you never know. And to me, like, if Will Levis, to me, like, the best part of Will Levis's game, right, is his great arm strength, and that's why I was maybe a little surprised that he played last week, because that shoulder was still impacting his arm strength, and he himself said it impacted the interception he threw. So if that's impacting his arm strength, maybe you take a long look at whether you play him on Sunday or not.
Well, I'm glad you brought that up, Johnny. And I don't know if I have that clip in the bank or not. I don't think I do offhand. But when he said that to us on Sunday, obviously that's something to be taken into consideration. And, it's revisionist history to go back and say, well, they should have rested him against the Colts or whatever. Tried to win a game against the league's worst defense at the time that they couldn't move the ball against, at least through the air. And get him ready for a tough road game at Buffalo or at Detroit, which is what is upcoming here in the next couple of weeks. And when he said it, I said, okay, that's one thing. And then that was what? After Callahan. So we didn't get a chance to talk to Callahan about it until the next day. And Callahan didn't seem to think that was a issue on that particular play at all. And then I talked to Greg Cosell, Johnny, this week on the podcast, and Greg said, no, it's got nothing to do with his arm strength. His footwork was, I'm paraphrasing. Greg wouldn't say this, but his footwork was awful. He did like a jump hop and then stared down the receiver after holding the ball too long and he just screwed it up. So I don't know what to make of them. I don't know what to make of him. All I know is that nobody seems to be on the same page with any of this shit. And we're 7 weeks into the season, and Nick Holtz is talking at a press conference, what was that, yesterday, about needing to learn how to get in and out of the huddle with more urgency. It's week 7.
Now, isn't that week 2 in training camp? Yeah, I know what you're saying. Yeah, and kind of circling back there on Levis, I think you're right. I think Greg Cosell is right too, in that there were certain things that he certainly did on that interception. The footwork wasn't great. And obviously there was a hitch, a pause in the throw too. But I think even with those things, usually Levis has the kind of arm strength that can make up, for those kind of mistakes in the lead up to it. And then there was a pass that kind of went under the radar a little bit that he threw in earlier. I want to say one was on the first few drives the Titans had. That got nowhere near close to the end zone. It was intended for Calvin Ridley, one of the many that were intended for Calvin Ridley. And that was almost picked off too. And that, to me, maybe in retrospect, you look at that pass as well and you say, maybe the arm strength wasn't really as what it should be. But it is interesting because, like you say, Brian Callahan said during the week and even afterwards too, that he saw no evidence during practice and apparently had got no feedback from Will Levis that there was any kind of issue with the arm. So it was a little bit strange to hear two different accounts after the game there.
Does sitting him give them a better chance to win in Buffalo? Because I
If
think
he's
I'm in favor of sitting him, honestly.
Yeah, yeah, especially if he's not strength. Like I say, that to me is Will Levis's biggest asset is the arm strength. And right now there aren't a lot of strengths in Will Levis's game. I'm not trying to be snide. That's just the case. And if he can't throw the ball the way he likes to, I think it's probably wisest to sit him. Maybe it's another opportunity for him to kind of sit back, watch things again, and maybe that benefits him. But really, you can make a pretty strong case that were he not Will Levis, a second-year quarterback who had been drafted in the second round by this general manager last year, were there other circumstances, this quarterback would be sitting already. He hasn't given us much in the way of, hey, there's something we can see, there's something we can build on. It's basically, unfortunately for Levis and the Titans, it's been one turnover after another, one mistaken decision after another. So you can make a pretty solid argument that Mason Rudolph does give them a better threat. Does make them a better threat to win. Honestly, even if Will Levis is healthy, the way he is playing right now, we don't have a big sample size from Mason Rudolph, but we know that when he went in against Miami, he was at least mistake free. They didn't ask it much of him. He didn't do a whole lot, but he didn't make any poor decisions. There were no turnovers. And when you look at Mason Rudolph's most recent body of work before that, it's pretty good. At the end of last season in Pittsburgh, he won 3 regular season games, got the Steelers into the playoffs, didn't win the playoff game, but he's you can make the argument that if you want to go back to that stretch of time, his run of play is probably better than Will Levis's right now.
I would rather watch 9 of 17 for 85 yards, a run game and a defense than what it is that we're slogging through at this point, Johnny. And listen, I know that there have been worse football seasons for this franchise before now. This is not, the end times or anything like that, even though it feels pretty lousy given how much marketing and how much upselling the franchise was doing around everything that they spent their entire offseason doing. And now, it looks very premature to be diplomatic about it, and you can be just diplomatic about it if you want to. But this is the thing that I guess I get caught up in. If you say you sit Levis on Sunday and Rudolph plays and they win a football game, you can't go back to Will Levis. Like, it's over.
It's tough. It's tough. Coaches certainly say, they don't want to take away starting jobs due to injury. Certainly Mike Vrabel was that kind of coach. We haven't really had the same circumstance with Brian Callahan yet. If Mason Rudolph goes in there and goes 9 for 17 for 85 yards and they win, it's easier to say, okay, thanks, Mason. We appreciate that, but we're going back to Will Levis. If Mason Rudolph goes in there and throws even for 200 yards and a touchdown or two, and they upset Buffalo in Buffalo, that's gonna be a whole lot of blowback if you go back to Will Levis at this point, because, and this kind of goes back also, the Brian Callahan has kind of been of two minds in when he's talked about this season. He has talked about this basically the entire season been being an evaluation period for Will Levis, and I understand that. He's a second round pick, only in his second year, so I can understand that. But then the other day when he says, ahead of evaluation, winning is a top priority, which also makes sense. But how many times, if Will Levis continues to underperform, how many times can you continue to roll him out there and say we're evaluating him, and say at the same time we're trying to win? Because the two don't seem to work together. If Will Levis is really giving you very little chance to win, are you really making winning your top priority by doing that?
Yeah, it's a tough spot to be caught between or caught in, because like Brian Callen's not going to take this guy up publicly, nor would any coach or anything like that. Nobody expects him to, right? Even though we poke and prod every week with these questions, and they tell us what they think about the quarterback with the quote unquote, by the coach's own admission, 2 conservative game plans. in these last two games that they've played, specifically to protect the quarterback instead of letting him do the thing that he does best, which is go out there and play gunslinger quarterback. And I understand that that's not the most efficient thing, but like Johnny, it makes me insane because I don't know what to make of this coaching staff yet. I have no idea if they're good. I don't know if they're bad, but all I know is the whole thing. Even in Amy Adams' statement when they fired Mike Vrabel, Levis is a focal point of why they need to make changes now to maximize the promising young quarterback that they have. He looks worse.
I agree. That's probably the most disappointing thing is that it's not just the fact that Will Levis hasn't taken that step forward. It's when you look back at last year, it was a decent performance. He certainly wasn't going to the Pro Bowl based on what he did last year, but for his circumstance, being a rookie, stepping in, starting 9 games, stats were solid, and he certainly gave reason to be optimistic going into this season. And then if you look back, even Brian Callahan did a pretty lengthy interview before the season started, and talked about one of the reasons they made so many additions on the free agent front. Whether it's Calvin Ridley, whether it's Lloyd Cushenberry, etc. Well, granted, they needed to fill those holes, but part of that was because of the confidence that watching Will Levis, even on tape last year, gave them. They said, yeah, let's go out and spend some money. Let's get this kid a couple receivers. Let's get this kid a better offensive line because we think he can be a potential franchise quarterback. And then you go back to kind of this whole sort of plan and idea for Will Levis, and I get what Brian Callahan wanted to do with Levis. I understand boost the completion rate, make him a more consistent quarterback, make him able to move down the field more consistently. All of that makes sense. And I think Will Levis has been really, really trying to be that guy. But as you just referenced, that's not Will Levis naturally. Will Levis is a guy who likes to throw the ball downfield, was pretty good about doing so last year, much less so this year. And so not only have we seen fewer deep balls this year, despite the addition of Calvin Ridley, but the deep passes have not been as successful. And you just get the idea that, no one specifically said this, but you just get the sense that Will Levis is trying to fit himself into this idea, this scheme of being a high percentage completion rate quarterback, more checkdowns, move the ball down the field, which again, I understand there needed to be, there needed to be some improvement there, but has there been too much? Have the scales been tipped a little bit too much? Have you kind of neutered, if you will, the Will Levis that got a lot of people fired up with the explosive plays last year?
And the thing is, like, if so say, he's not going to be able to open if he plays on Sunday. We'll find out as we take this on, or as we are doing this podcast today on a Friday. If you're just now joining us, that's John Glennon of the Nashville Post. You can also check out the First and 10 TENN podcast wherever it is that you get your podcasts. If he starts, like, it's not like they're going to open it up now against the Bills, right? If he's got a bad shoulder and he's more limited in practice, he was more limited in practice this week than he was the week that he hurt the damn thing. It's not like they can go back and say, all right, Bob, reins off. Like, let's go. Let's look like the Will Levis of old, play comfortably, play freely. Don't overthink it. I don't know if we're 7 weeks in. I don't know if you can go back to that after you've just spent all this time trying to reconfigure him. And he is talking to us. What was that? The Jets game about rewiring his brain?
Yeah. Right.
In week 2,
Right.
There's no quarterback lobotomy on the horizon. Like, I don't know what they're going to be able to do this guy, Johnny. And I say all this because, like, I feel for him, I mean, it's got to be a miserable experience. He was as excited as anybody for all this. Certainly Titans fans were as excited as anybody for the changes that they were, essentially promised to an extent, right? I don't think promised is too strong of a word, especially when you see stats like this from ESPN, where he's averaging the second fewest completions per game to wide receivers this season, 7.4, according to ESPN. Only Jacoby Brissett, Jake Brisket, is averaging less, and he just got his ass benched.
Yeah, and that brings up the point that I made earlier. Also, again, if this wasn't Will Levis, a second round draft pick, the number 33 overall pick in his second year, I think there's a pretty good chance that we probably would have seen a benching by now based on the numbers and based on the inconsistencies. And again, the fact that we just haven't seen too many, you know, gunslinger, if you will, plays that really were the ones that characterized Will Levis and gave somebody so much optimism going into this season. And I asked Will Levis at his availability earlier this week. One of the things I was curious about, I said, has there been more of a contrast maybe in this year's offensive scheme, offensive system than you might have thought?
Mm.
Changing from last year. And he said, maybe I should have expected the answer, but he said no. That there wasn't a huge contrast, and he continues to tell us that he feels very comfortable in the offense, that he likes the offense. But you wonder, if you sat down with Will Levis all by himself and there's no reporting or cameras or anything going on, and you said, "Look, Will, you had these numbers and did some of these things last year. The reason that it's not happening this year, is it just you, or do we have to, does this new coaching staff have to take some culpability as well?" As you mentioned, Buck, we don't, Brian Callahan, as smart a guy as he seems to be, and as good a track record rising through the ranks as he appears to be, the fact is he has never been a play caller, obviously has never been a head coach before, has a coordinator who has never held that role before. And Bo Hardigree, has been the quarterback's coach for a few years, but not steeped in experience either. So I think it's very fair to at least ask questions about the coaching staff as well as Will Levis, and say, are they doing the best they can to get the most out of Will Levis?
Yeah, because that's been my thing all week long, Johnny. And it's, again, I mentioned talking myself into circles. Like, you got a quarterback that you've worked with enough to where it's evident based on the game plans that they are putting together that they don't fully trust this guy, or that they've made enough of a determination on this guy relative to what their expectations were. So you've got a quarterback that you don't trust, but also your coaching staff isn't making him better and is paid to come in here and problem solve. And frankly, it's like, I feel like I have to say this every damn week. I'm not here to relitigate Mike Vrabel for Brian Callahan or everything like, we all understand that there were certain boxes that this team set out to check in the offseason. And by all accounts, like, in theory, it made a lot more sense on paper when you saw what they were doing. But I mean, based off even the coordinator press conference yesterday, where Holtz is getting more animated, Nick Holtz, the offensive coordinator, getting more animated about this situation. Brian Callahan's answers are becoming less and less enlightening by the week, by the losses, to where it's just a longer-winded version of, I got to play better, coach better, the whole thing. And Nick Holtz didn't directly take Will Levis out today, but he certainly didn't pull any punches on the criticism of him. So if the whole thing is we're not pointing fingers, well, then what the hell is that? Because that to me seems like a pretty direct pointing of a finger from a coach to a quarterback, when the coach is also tasked with figuring him the hell out and making him better. That's why I don't think this coaching staff deserves to be let off the hook, even if Levis is the crux of the problem. That's shit to me.
Right. I think you're right. I think this coaching staff is learning too as they go. This is a first time for a lot of these guys in the positions that they held, and it takes me back actually to the question I asked Brian Callahan way back. I guess it was after the kind of the boneheaded Levis play in the Jets game. When he screamed, what the fuck are you doing, Will? That kind of thing. And it kind of takes me back. I caught grief, of course, for asking, hey, Brian, do you think of maybe altering, your sideline demeanor, knowing you're the guy in the spotlight now, and every emotion is going to be magnified a thousand times. But that's the kind of thing. And he agreed. Actually, he said, I probably should be, basically, and because that obviously reflects poorly on your quarterback, basically, when you're cursing the guy out and seen by millions of people as well.
And reflects poorly on you, because Ryan Fitzpatrick got on Twitter afterward and said, I don't know how to feel about this dude who's publicly picking out his players.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I agree, and that's what I mean. Though they're learning. That's a situation where they're learning, and Brian Callahan says later says, we shouldn't have done that. It's probably not the wisest move in the world. But yeah, the question now is with everybody learning, how long does that take? How long is the learning curve? And I mean, the good news, I guess, for Brian Callahan and company is that the leash presumably is a pretty long one, given that the man was just hired, and certainly, you don't think things are going to go awry that quickly. I would think, though, that the leash on Will Levis and his learning curve is shortening week by week. As I say, I suspect, if you were a different quarterback and not a potential franchise quarterback, I suspect he already would have been benched. And I just don't think you can keep rolling him out there if he continues with these kind of performances and say, this is the best way we think to win the game. At some point, it's not. It's
Yeah.
clearly not.
Johnny, I told you I'd keep you for 20 minutes, but I just have two more things that I want to get through because it was a pretty busy week, and I know you asked
Oh,
DeAndre
yes.
Hopkins about the idea of a potential trade situation, which I like Hop a lot. I respect him, his upfrontness. The question about him not being on social media
Yeah.
was, yeah, pretty online guy, DeAndre Hopkins, but that's okay. That's okay. Maybe it is his kids. I don't know.
I
uh,
completely agree with you. Yeah, yeah, yeah. Just real funny. It's done quick on that because we've both seen him active, on social media. So I just went back just to check, both his Twitter and his Instagram and so forth. And sure enough, there are posts on both within the last few days. So I think DeAndre had a pretty good poker face on that one, saying, I really am social media too. Tell me what's up there.
the man would be a hell of a poker player with the way that
Yes,
he can keep it stone faced in real time. Maybe that's the blue steel IMG modeling stuff that he's got going on.
that's right. That's right.
So quickly, because they're going to the coaching staff and sticking with the wide receiver thing before we go to DeAndre Hopkins specifically. Talk about learning in real time. Traylon Burks is apparently not on injured reserve yet, but he's an IR candidate. He got hurt in practice. And it's not a good thing anytime a player gets hurt, of course, but like they have all but had to have their hand forced on getting him the hell out of the lineup. And that's another point of contention for me with this coaching staff. When Nick Resperkakina gets his first target, and ironically enough, it's a touchdown. I'm not saying every time you throw to NWI, it's going to be a touchdown, but like little stuff like that, Johnny, that ends up not being so little in when
Mhm.
you're in as many one-score games as this team has been so far. That makes my head explode when I'm watching them keep trotting out Traylon Burks. And I know his snap count had gotten less
Yeah.
in the last couple of weeks. By the way, just to twist the knife, Traylon has 4 catches for 35 yards this year, 53 catches, 699 yards, 1 receiving touchdown in 27 games since he was drafted. A.J. Brown in that same time, 205 catches, 3,187 yards, and 20 damn touchdowns in 36 games, Johnny. That makes me scream.
Yeah, yeah, I completely understand. Traylon Burks, some ways you feel sorry for the guy because he can't, you obviously use the comparison with AJ, and that's he was under the gun right away. It was basically, hey, we just traded AJ, who we take on the number pick, Traylon Burks. Okay, clearly you're meant to be the next AJ. And in fact, there were several scouting reports that said he compared favorably to AJ Brown,
Oh, yeah.
body type, type of receiver, etc. Obviously, has not proven out to date. I think he missed 22 or missed 12 of the 34 games the last 2 years, and obviously it looks like he's going to miss several more this year. And the unusual thing too is a lot of these injuries aren't necessarily the ones that he's taking big hits or anything like that. I mean, this is a practice injury that he suffered this time around. And going back to training camp, there are numerous times, and I mentioned this. I asked Brian Callahan about it one time. I said, is there something about him that maybe you guys can teach him to land a little more gracefully? And
Yes.
he does. Every time he goes down, it's awkward looking. It's on a hip or with a knee in the wrong direction, or his head certainly has, come down and resulted in a concussion too. And it just looks for a guy who's a professional athlete, it just looks a little unusual. Brian Callahan said, he sort of laughed and said, but maybe something to look into. But honestly, if a guy is having so much difficulty just with the basic rudiments or fundamentals of a game, it's hard to believe he's going to be able to take all the bangs and collisions throughout the season. And there's always the pull, kind of that magnetism of the first round draft pick, right? You always want to say, I bet if we just give him this one more chance, it's going to happen. And he kind of adds to that. I think the last two off seasons, what's the so much talk of another great offseason, Traylon Burks. He's been here all the time. He's in tremendous shape. He looks great. And what happens? Same kind of thing. How he looks good in training camp, and then all of a sudden he just can't get healthy, or he's not consistent enough catching either. One of the things he did so well in college was he out battled defensive backs deep. Not incredible speed, but he would block guys out enough that he would be able to make catches downfield. We haven't seen that either. He's not been particularly good at contested catches in the NFL either.
No, and that's the thing which makes it crazy, because he's bigger than AJ. Like, he's
Yeah,
physically bigger than AJ,
right.
and
Right.
it's not even remotely the same thing. And I'm so glad you brought up that point about training camp, that question, because I remember doing the radio show live during training camp with Lucas and looking over at him, saying talking about Traylon Burks, saying every time he catches a deep ball, he comes crashing down to earth in ways that make you think he's going to get hurt again.
Right.
I don't know
Right.
that we don't know. We're obviously not at practice during that portion right now. Practice limitations are what they are. We watch stretch, we watch individual period, and then we're sent off to the shadows until afterwards to go in the locker room. But so we don't know specifically what happened to Traylon. The other part of that is DeAndre Hopkins in the wide receiver room. Hour is late for this team, only in the 2.5 weeks into October. Other teams at the bottom of the division, even though they're not quite at the bottom of the division, the Jags are, because they have one more loss, but the Jags are selling parts, the Browns are selling parts, the Raiders are selling parts. The only part that I think would be viable to be sold here is DeAndre Hopkins to another team. And Johnny, you asked him that question yesterday in the locker room about whether he would be interested, whether, one, he had heard anything about it, and poker face wasn't what it was, and two, would he be interested in anything like that at all? And his answer was, I'm present, I'm here, I play football, I love my life, and all these different things, and not acknowledging the idea whether he would be for or against the idea of a trade. But if he walks at the end of the year and they get nothing out of it, that's an indictment of the front office to me.
I agree with you. It's a missed opportunity. To me, you go back to last year, and I can remember writing, especially after they traded Kevin Byard on the way up to the trade deadline, and saying, "Hey, great, good job. Now that you've started this, keep it going." Why not at this point where they were last year? Trade Derrick Henry, trade Ryan Tannehill, trade even a guy like Danico Autry or Weber. As long as you've started down that path, why not keep going? And they didn't at all. Once the Kevin Byard move was made, and certainly, yeah, I agree with you. I think this year DeAndre Hopkins is by far their most manageable or tradable asset at this point. He's in the last year of his contract. He's a great veteran presence. He's not the guy that he used to be, but he could certainly help a contender. I'm sure that the Chiefs fans would love to see him in a uniform for the rest of this year. And I maybe if the Titans had won last week against Indianapolis, we're probably not having this conversation, because unbelievably enough, the Titans would have been in second place in the division, still just 2 losses behind the Texans, 2 wins in a row. Things have a whole different look, but they don't right now. The Titans are 1-4. You got Buffalo and Detroit upcoming as 2 of the 3 games before the trade deadline. And I think you got to take what you can. I would guess, if I had to, DeAndre Hopkins might merit maybe a 4th, maybe a 5th round draft pick at this point. He's up in years, and he's banged up probably a little bit as well. But why not? Especially I think if there's another loss this week, as the forecast certainly is expected to be. I think you really got to look awfully hard at that. It just makes too much sense. And DeAndre Hopkins, has been a great guy in his short time with the Titans. But I'm sure he would like to, even if he's not going to say it on the record, I'm sure he would love to chase a championship. He's never been in a Super Bowl.
Has he been in a conference title game?
I don't think so. I'm pretty
I would have to go
sure.
back and
Yeah.
look. I want to say that Texans team with him on it played in one AFC Championship game, but I
Yeah.
don't
They
remember off the
suffered some big upset losses, I can remember,
yeah,
if I recall correctly. Yeah.
certainly.
Um, but because it was interesting too. The other question we asked DeAndre Hopkins was, "What do you think of these veteran wide receivers being moved, Devonte Adams and Amari Cooper?" And he said, "Well, I think that's great. I think these are, basically, I'm paraphrasing again, but these are great wide receivers, and they're getting their chance at winning a championship." So if you want to read between the lines, maybe there a little bit, you know, DeAndre Hopkins is in the same boat as these guys. So presumably you have to believe he would want to get a shot at a championship. And when you're 32-year-old wide receiver, there's not going to be too many more opportunities for this. So one of the few reasons I would think they might hold on to him, and I don't think it's enough. But again, if you're talking about this Will Levis experiment, the Will Levis evaluation, do you want to have the best possible assortment of wide receivers for him? Do you want to keep DeAndre Hopkins because of that, to give you a true measure of Will Levis with all the weapons, with Ridley, with Tyler Boyd, et cetera, et cetera. So maybe that comes into the thinking process at some point, but to me, I just think it makes an awful lot of sense. Again, especially if it's a loss this week, you're dropped to 1-5. You're at Detroit the next week. It's time to make some moves.
What was your favorite one of Jamal Adams, Titans legends, 20 snaps here?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at the tape on that one.
Good luck.
Yeah, look very hard. But yeah, it was interesting, and I didn't really think of this at the time, but then I kind of went back and looked at it and kind of read or tweeted something out. But really, when they signed Jamal Adams, obviously they didn't invest a lot of money in him. He was a veteran minimum, so that's okay. But really, that signing and obviously later on, Andre Diggs. But I think especially Jamal Adams, because he played the same position really as Elijah Molden. Well, that certainly, presumably, was one of the reasons Elijah Molden said, "Get me out of here. I got, I think I should be playing ahead of probably Jamal Adams, and I need a trade." So they did that for him. Elijah Molden is now kind of lighting it up.
Yeah.
Surprisingly enough, for the Chargers, he's got a couple of picks. He's got a fumble recovered, a few PBUs, and he started 3 of the 5 games out there. I don't think they expected that of him here, but nonetheless, signed Jamal Adams. Elijah Molden wants to go elsewhere. Jamal Adams doesn't play; he wants to go elsewhere. So, certainly nothing much was accomplished with that signing.
The wheels on the bus go round and round. That's John Glennon at Glennon Sports of the Nashville Post. That's where you can read him. You can listen to him on the First and 10 TENN podcast, wherever you get your podcast. Johnny, I'm glad I finally tracked you down. Thank you for making some time on a Friday afternoon. I know you could be doing anything, but we appreciate you giving us some of your insights here.
Absolutely. Appreciate you having me on, Buck. Thank you.